Hello, everyone, and welcome to our December book club. Today, I'm joined by Coonoor Behal, and she is the author of I Quit, The Life Affirming Joy of Giving Up. Welcome. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, especially because, I have a little secret, which is that I had the great blessing to be interviewed as Coonoor was going through her aggregating of stories and beginning the storytelling journey. And I don't know whether or not anything that I said was useful and actually will make it into the book. But, I feel completely selfish to have you here, and especially because the book has not officially been published yet. We are getting you pre-publish, and so it's just
Yeah,
an
this
honor to have
this
you.
is quite literally like the start of my virtual book tour, which is starting like this week. So I'm doing like some podcasts and appearances, but some of the ones I've already done, I don't know when they'll be released, but so yours is going to be the first. So
All
yeah.
righty. Yes. Look at that community. Look at us getting things
Yeah.
off the press.
Exclusive. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. That is a habit I could get used to. Let's talk about this because I mean, the first thing I hear, I think a lot of people hear when they think I quit,
Mhm.
the life affirming joy, these things don't often come in with a sentence, colon or no colon. What the hell does this mean?
Yeah, I love that question. I think if more questions began with "what the hell," we would get to the point a lot quicker. I love it. So yeah, I think that the title came to me truthfully before I ever even knew I was going to write it. I
Mm,
just happened to just jot it down. I had this idea for years, and this idea around quitting being positive and me wanting to collect people's stories of when they quit things was really the genesis of that was like my own life and my own experience, like very much kind of being a perfectionist up until like my mid to late 20s, until I realized it wasn't really working for me or for my life, and I started to really quit things. And I started to, with the knowledge I had gained about myself, which obviously I didn't have when I was like 19 and still a perfectionist, but with the knowledge I gained about myself as I kind of grew up a little bit, got kind of the confidence to kind of make big life choices and like big
mm,
life decisions. And many of those big life decisions involved leaving things behind, which is a euphemism a lot of people like to use instead of using that hard consonant filled word of quit, And so I'm a big fan of the quit. I quit, because it does imply that decisiveness, right? And this kind of
mm.
like self knowledge of like, I am propelling myself and my life forward. I am making progress, and that was really how I have experienced my own life in the past 15, 20 years, which is every time I quit something, it got me that much closer to what I actually wanted.
Say more about that because I think,
Yeah.
when I think through my own life, I normally, at least in the past, at least growing up, quitting was viewed as going nowhere. It was a loser's path to quit.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, we've all heard that like obnoxious phrase, quitters never win, right? Well, like the logical inverse of that is that quitters are losers, right? And so I think I just don't believe that to be true, And so, but you're totally right. It is very much like a cultural thing that we are raised with. I think through a lot of the stories that I collected, like yours included, it really kind of shed light for me on a couple of things. One is that a lot of our earliest conceptions around the shame and stigma that quitting has are sourced in youth sports. It's kind of like the first times you kind of hear like quitters never win, don't give up, that this kind of thing. The other thing that I learned was that I had this assumption that the stigma and shame around quitting was possibly a uniquely American thing, like tied to puritanical work ethics, right? That we have. And what I learned, like I interviewed several people who happen to have been raised in other countries, and the stigma and the shame is there too, and so it really seems to be this thing that exists in a lot of different places in the world, a lot of different cultures. It seems to exist and transcend class and race and gender. Like everyone is somehow a victim of this stigma around quitting.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, one of the things I'm always talking about, how trauma is the great unifier, right? Like trauma's the least racist thing you'll ever meet because trauma does not care, right?
It's like the oxygen we breathe, right?
Exactly, right? And so interesting to think that the stories we've been told about quitting are also universal, and I remember in one part of the book, you sort of map out these different kind of idiomatic expressions that have become quite popular around quitting, and how these really set us up for this constant sort of self-flagellation towards this drive that even when it is clear that quitting would be or not quitting something would be ultimately detrimental to our health or to our well-being, that we keep driving forward. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it definitely is like there. I think a lot of, so I want to start out by saying that like the message that I hope people get from the book is not quit everything in your life right now. Like there are such things as bad quits. Like in my introduction, I talk about a quit that I really regretted, right? And I made it right later in my life, but I regretted it. And so I think like forgive me if I'm like forgetting what your original question was. But please remind me what your question was. I'm so sorry. I want to.
It was just to hear you speak because I love your words. And so, like, forget the question. Just keep talking.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it was about like the quotes that are out there. The kind of like, sit just on a pillow, see this in your high school guidance counselor's office on a poster, kind of quotes about quitting. And like, to me, it kind of like, it's very toxic. It's almost like what we now know to be toxic positivity sometimes, it's like, well, I have lived with, been friends with, worked alongside people who, in my estimation, are living their lives by inertia. They are in fact not making a choice. They are staying still, they are being static, and they are unhappy, right? And I think it's like, you began to say this, like, quitting is a choice, but so is not quitting, right? And I feel like our society has really fooled us into assuming that to stay still, to not quit, to stick it out, all these euphemisms we have around it, is somehow less risky than making the choice to quit something and move towards something else, and I've done a lot of like informal mentorship and give a lot of career advice to people over the years, and I found myself, a common refrain that I tell people is, it's a risk if you do and it's a risk if you don't. Like no one can tell you that not doing the thing is less risky than doing the thing, and so I think that it's bound up with a lot of notions I have around not wanting to live my own life with inertia, like wanting to like make choices and make progress, and that quitting has been a really good way to fast track that, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, this thing that you just said is just like echoing in my mind. The idea that not quitting is also a choice.
Yeah.
And that we often miss the opportunity to frame what is the choice I am making by not leaving, by not saying I'm done with something, by not walking away. What am I ultimately choosing? And a lot of the book, you really focus on the stories of women who have gone through this journey of finally allowing themselves to
Mhm.
quit.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of women, and everybody across the gender spectrum, but especially those cultured as women, that we are told these stories that if you quit that abusive marriage, that if you quit that
Yeah.
job where maybe you're getting some semblance of upward mobility, but at the expense of all of this misogyny you're being inundated with,
Yeah.
you're making the best choice. Whereas forget the fact that it is entirely detrimental to your personal health and well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my first big quit was probably also my first big job quit, like
Mm,
career quit. And I went to graduate school because I like did all the right things, and I went to graduate school, got a master's degree, and I really had this ambition to kind of be a nonprofit social do-gooder for the rest of my life. I very much came from privilege, and I really wanted to spend my life and my career kind of helping those less fortunate than me. And so I got my first job after after graduate school. And 3 months in, I got sexually harassed by 3 months in, by a man who had been doing this forever
mm,
and should have been fired 10 years before I ever even got to that organization. Right. And so, and I have ultimately, a year and a half later, left that job, even though I did get that idiot fired, thank God. But it was a struggle. I had to I was 25 years old and needing to tell my male white directors that I expected something to be done, that I was not going to let them yet again sweep it under the rug and avoid doing their jobs as leaders, right? But that, of course, kind of gave me a black mark, in the organization. And I basically just didn't feel safe. I didn't trust my organization, my leadership to not put me in those situations again. Right. And so that's just really an example of I thought I was going to do this the rest of my life. And within 3 months, I got new information, honestly. I got new information about the type of organizational culture that I might be signing up for. But I also learned a lot about myself. I learned really quickly about myself that wow, I thought I could withstand anything so long as the mission was there and the work I was doing was good. But I learned really, really quickly that that was not my trade-off. I learned a lot about what I was willing to put up with, what I wasn't willing to put up with. I learned a lot about what values I had and if and when and how I needed those values to be respected or expressed in my work. And so when I left that job, it was and I left that entire industry, it was with that additional knowledge and self-awareness. And it made me have that confidence to be see ya, wouldn't want to be ya later, And so, but if I had just stayed in it, I would have been miserable. I would have been making minimum wage. I would have not been respected. It would have been just all these things that I couldn't live with myself for, and by virtue of leaving, I got much, much closer to what I did want in a career faster. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. You're reminding me of my father,
Mhm.
always says to me, it doesn't matter how long you are somewhere, always leave it better than you found it.
Ah, nice. Yeah.
This idea that, you can know going into something, I'm not going to be here for that long, or I've come to this company, it's very clear I'm going to be
Yeah.
exiting this company very soon, but you still leave it better than you found it. And, as you're talking about, I was not going to quit while also leaving this individual to still perpetrate these harms on
Yes.
the potential individual that was going to step into the role that I was vacating.
Yeah.
You already named it. One of the things I love you talk about in the book is a good quit and a bad quit. Can you tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about what those mean?
Yeah. Well, all the stories that I've collected and tell in the book, they are all by that definition good quits, because the people who tell me their stories, like, even if it was hard or if it was easy, like, they have no regrets about their quits, right? But when I tell my own kind of story at the beginning, there is this idea of like a good quit and a bad quit. Like for me, like I referenced earlier, in the introduction, I share like a bad quit, and that for me was when I was in college. Like, the long story short is that I was really interested in comedy, and I got encouraged to take an improv class, and I signed up for it. And I went to the first class, and I got really scared of being bad at something. Because remember, I was a 19-year-old perfectionist. I was used to being good at things. And suddenly I was confronted with this thing that like was an interest of mine that I may not be good at. And instead of finding out, I quit the class. I had paid for 8 sessions. I went to the first one, never went back. And I instantly and forever regretted it, and I think it's because it really, like, I felt shame around it, because it was a bad quit, because it was something, it was not, I was refusing to challenge myself, and I was refusing to learn more about myself by virtue of quitting it. Right. And so with like a few years of hindsight, I kind of became less of a perfectionist, and I like reflected back on who I was at that age and how I was pretty much self-selecting things that I knew I would be good at, academically or activity wise, and wasn't probably challenging myself, and so that was a source of the regret about that quit, and why I call it a bad quit. And then I ended up years later doing improv, and now I've been doing it for 10 years, and I'm addicted to it. It's part of my business, so I feel like I really like unquit that quit, because it was a bad one, right? It was a quit that did not reflect my values or who I was, and so that was definitely like the process of undoing that quit, like taught me a lot, that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even that is powerful, the idea that you can unquit something.
Yeah. So a lot of the people I speak to in the book, like, there are definitely some people who are like, burn all the bridges, tear it down, like, just set it on fire and leave. There's definitely people who that is their quitting style. And I totally respect that. I've been there, and so I'm not going to pass judgment on that, because I probably still dream about how I should have been more scorched earth with some of my quits. But then there are some people who, like, the definition for them of a good quit is in the how they quit, and so they take a lot of pride in like, oh, I quit this with dignity, or I quit this in a way that I preserved the relationship, that if I ever wanted to unquit, I could, So for some people, they really value the how that they went about quitting, and that is what kind of gives them the no regrets and makes them feel like they were living their values in quitting that thing.
Wow. Wow. And it's interesting because in all of the stories that you're telling, you see this real theme around each of the quote unquote quitters. There's this separation between something that they are quitting because it sort of was directly impacting their humanity.
Yeah.
Versus, like you said before, making a choice to value themselves, value their humanity, value their dignity.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's why I found this topic and these stories so fascinating, because it's like I when I was first starting my business, I was going on a lot of, frankly, kind of aimless coffee chats with people, just to kind of like talk about my business and like, figure out how to like talk about what I was doing. And it's a common thing, especially in America, to like, when you meet someone for the first time, you kind of, recite your resume to each other and like what you used to do, what you do now, where you used to live, where you live now. And I really found myself being most intrigued by what people had left behind, and I would kind of interject and say, oh, wait, tell me why you left that job, or tell me why you left that city. And I found it like to be a really good way to like understand someone really quickly and understand their values, again, their trade-offs, what they're willing to put up with, what they're not willing to put up with. And so I think there's a lot of value in hearing someone's quitting stories and like understanding the why behind them, to really understand that person and also like understand like yourself, if you kind of just like examine the things that you've quit or maybe not quit and why, you can kind of maybe figure out like, okay, well, am I living my values? Have I reached my not going to take it anymore level, right? And because it's a personal decision, it's totally around your self-knowledge and what your trade-offs are, like no one can make that decision for you, and so but if you are sticking it out, or if you are committed for the sake of being committed, or you are living your life with inertia simply because it's just easier to not make a choice, it's like, well, really you are making a choice, and yeah.
What is one of the, I have my personal favorites, but I'd love to hear which of the stories just really stands out for you. It was a big light bulb moment.
Definitely the conversation I had with you, I'll bring up first.
She's totally saying that because I'm here right now, people.
No, I'm not, because it's something that I learned something so new, and it's something that I'm still kind of like researching and trying to understand better, because I like in our conversation, you really helped me connect this idea of perfectionism and how that relates to the stigma and shame around quitting with like a white supremacy culture, which I had, for all my joking of how I wish we had, oppressed the Puritans out of North America, because maybe we'd have social benefits like Europe has now, and not have the puritanical work ethic. And maybe have better liquor laws state to state, but all these things that can be traced back to Puritans that are not good. But I hadn't really connected it to like modern day kind of like white supremacy culture. So I thank you for kind of opening my eyes, like another facet of like where this all comes from and how it is continually lived out, like in our society. I think another one that comes to mind, because this book is definitely not just about people quitting jobs or careers. There are stories about people quitting identities, quitting habits, quitting people and relationships, and a lot of kind of entry points in a whole entire life that you might quit, and so one of the things that I find, one of the stories I found really surprisingly compelling was I talked to someone who quit drinking soda.
Yeah.
Like that was his habit. But I got to tell you, like hearing his story was as compelling, if not more, than the person I talked to who quit heroin, and it was because of like just the motivations and like the struggle, and so that one really sticks out to me. I also really enjoyed speaking to a woman who quit the American dream, quit pursuing the American dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like this abstract idea and like aspirational value that she ultimately made a choice to like no longer partake in that, and so yeah, a lot of the stories are really great. I think definitely a lot of the quitting of people and relationships were very resonant for me, and I think those stories are where I probably include a bit more of myself and more of my own kind of anecdotes and personal stories sprinkled in to the main story.
I mean, well, I have to say you are a wonderful interviewer.
Thank you.
In my experience, just the way, one minute you had me talking about my divorce and, what some of the lowest points of my life in terms of being an entrepreneur and, quitting what it means to be a good little Black girl, it is amazing all of the ways that quitting plays a huge role in our lives, and yet we are not meant to talk about it.
Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
shamed anytime. We're supposed to always tell our stories of success and perseverance and
Yeah.
fighting our way to the top. But each of the success stories in our life is weighted by 100 or 101 little quits that got you
Exactly.
on that road, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And there's this book is certainly not like about my business and the work that I do through my business, but I think there's definitely a reason why I created my business and I also was attracted to quitting stories. So there's definitely some like connective tissue there just because it's like in my head. But I think like, it has a lot of a really big theme is like failure, right? Like we presume that like quitting is an acknowledgement of failure, right? And in my line of work, which is like innovation and creativity, I talk a lot about like productive failures, and like failures are how you learn if a product or service is working or not, right? And it's how you know you are learning. Like there is no definition of success if there's not also a definition of failure, right? And so in kind of like my business life, failure is something I try to really normalize, and have it be a part of a process, and so it kind of makes sense to me, like retroactively, that, this book and like quitting's connotations with failure and, the knowledge that you have of yourself allows you to make these quits with greater confidence and fewer regrets, and again, kind of it's all propelling you towards progress, right? Which is kind of the same way that I conceive of failure with my clients when we're trying to like achieve progress toward like a solution or a product or a customer experience of some kind.
Yeah. You need to say that again because somebody is hearing for the first time
Yeah.
that quitting and failure are not synonyms.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. And I think that's one reason why like a big mission for my book is that I hope that like people will just start to rethink quitting.
Yeah.
Like I think in my business world, for example, the word failure has started to shed some of its negative connotations, right?
Mhm.
So it's kind of like, well, can we do that in society for the word quitting? Like,
Yeah.
can we stop using euphemisms like let it go or left it behind or can we start to make decisions as opposed to just letting things organically go, like
Mhm.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Because part of my research in my early life was really around the ways that we culture women around failure and
Mm.
those who are cultured as female, and that we are often taught from a very early age that um, if you're a female, that to fail means that you are no longer worthy of love, attention,
Yeah.
community, connection, nurture, and that you must live your life in constant fear or constantly one step ahead of
Mm-hmm.
failure.
Yeah.
And, similar to the story in the book about the woman who's breaking up with the American
Mm-hmm.
dream, that those women who have reached a level of success, that is holistic in terms of um, successful careers that they love,
Mm-hmm.
family um, structure that allows for peace, that allows for their nurture and for the ways that they want to nurture their family, that allows them to be actively involved in their communities,
Mm-hmm.
that they had a very different relationship with failure and
Mm.
with quitting, that it was perceived as a roadmap towards better understanding themselves.
Huh.
And so, just so interesting that you're also drawing those same insights out of the book, because I think to your point, as we continue to reassess all of these puritanical messages that we've been taught. And, when you were saying that, I was thinking we'd also have a very different relationship to sex.
Yeah.
Please, can we start having that,
Yeah.
like,
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like you just propose sex to me, like we can start having it. Wait, what do you mean?
I'm fine with that. Yeah. I mean, like, we just stop making people feel shameful about wanting to like experience pleasure with their bodies. Cause
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like what's coming up for me there. I mean, not that like this idea of like privilege as well. I think another thing that's come out around quitting is that there are definitely things that like to be able to quit something like a job or like a marriage, like people who have privilege can do that much, much more easily. Like I went through a divorce this year, and the minute I made the decision, I just felt overwhelmingly grateful that I was in a position where I could make that choice and not be worried about having a roof over my head, not be worried about my safety, not be worried about myself financially, and like there's a lot of people, especially women, who don't have that freedom that comes with privilege to make quitting decisions, right? And so that's something that I definitely want to like respect, that sometimes when we talk about quitting, depending on what the quit is, it can be a vestige of privilege, right? And not always, but it can be. And but yeah, exactly what you just said. Like, I think also for women, like my sense is that we are raised to have to excel at many different roles compared to men who like maybe have to be good at one or two things. And so they can kind of like, they're allowed to compartmentalize and prioritize a lot more easily than women are, right? Because we're the ones with like 100 spinning plates and, the responsibilities on us, right? And so we're expected to be good at those things, and good at a lot of things as well, but also like we're meant to kind of like get our personal worth and value from it, and this idea of like self-worth, I think, has also come up quite a bit through these stories now that I'm talking about it, of like, do you value yourself to make this big decision, and do you, again, back to that kind of self-knowledge, do you know enough about yourself and what you value, to kind of make the decision or not, and like understand that you're not making the decision, but like it still is like meeting your values and your trade-offs. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I think that's a perfect place to end it, with that question to everyone around what do you need to quit today so that you can affirm that you value yourself?
Yeah.
What do you need to quit today so that you can affirm that you value yourself? Oh, thank you so much for coming on today, for kicking off your tour with us and our community. And you all heard it here first. We're both divorced and apparently going out on a date. So
yeah, and look at the smiles on our faces.
I know. Don't message us. Don't message us. You heard where we will be. Coonoor Behal, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. This is a real pleasure. And hello to everyone in your book club. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. You can find Coonoor Behal's book. We're going to be dropping all of the links down below so that you can pre-order the book, and then it will be out in just a couple of months. So we are so excited to be able to have that first look. So make sure that you pick up your copy and keep talking to us inside the LTHJ Global membership, and share your insights, share your light bulb moments, and we'll see you next time. Okay.